What's going on, everybody? It's D Got Sense, and I'm back here to explain this one simple principle. And hopefully, you guys are edified in your mind when it comes to this understanding. And so, I'm going to break it down. So, the red is a quote from history or one that I came up with. Typically, I do the ones that I came with up in blue. This should be blue, but since I'm trying to keep the theme all red and black, I'm just gonna stick with red from here on out. So let's get started. So first, I'm gonna break down what the quote is. I'm gonna read a summary of what my brain interpreted from the quote, and then I'll get into um, a deep understanding of what it truly means. So we all seek validation. What matters is where you get it from. Um, so just to touch on that real quick, we all got to understand what validation is. What validation is to seek the approval of others, right? And it's normal to seek approval of others, right? Or not of necessarily of others, but of something, and that's what I'll touch on later. But the only important thing is what matter where you get it from, because that's gonna determine the source. And if your source is finite and can be taken away or it will dwindle away, then you got a massive problems on your hand, a massive problem on your hand. So let's go continue. And we've all experienced human nature throughout our life, but most people deny the effects that it has on them. And validation seeking is no different than any other on the spectrum. So one thing we must understand about human nature. So when I uh, reference human nature, what I'm referring to is the nature that every human experiences. Like we all experience love, joy, hate, sadness, right? Um, at some point in our life, right? We experience the same things. That's why we're even able to relate to each other on certain matters. So that's what I'm referencing. So it says throughout our life, but most people deny the effects that it has on them. So most people are in denial. See, most people will embrace the positive sides of human nature, but really deny the negative sides of human nature, like envy, greed, um, hatred, anger. You know what I mean? People are and that stems from people always having a positive self opinion of themselves, right? Like if you ask most people, do they believe they're good? They'll tell you yes, right? Despite them being a liar, a, a covetous man or woman, an idolater, an adulteress, right? They'll tell you that they're good, but based on whose standard? It will be their own morality or a societal standard. That's why in most modern day cultures, what you have is a bunch of people believing that good is evil and evil is good, right? That's why everything's all over the place because no one's following the righteous standard of the Most High Yah. So everybody's left to their own devices about how to carry on as a human. So to touch on to touch that was just to touch on that, and the reason I say validation seeking is no different is because um, that stems from a few of them, right? But it's no different in terms of people will reject the idea that it has an effect on them. So let's continue to the second portion, which says for the majority, their earliest experience of validation seeking happens typically in their childhood, and this usually sets the tone for their life unless it is consciously changed. So, what I'm saying here is that from the time you're a little boy or a little girl, you're seeking the approval of your parents, right? That's why when you're a child, you try to be the star of the show, the class clown, right? You love to see people smile and receive joy from the actions that you're doing, right? That's why kids, whenever you get onto them, they take it the hardest because it's the inverse or the exact opposite of validation, right? They're receiving rejection, right? Because remember, validation is the approval of others. So what's the opposite of approval, which is rejection? And I'm gonna get down deeper into what the whole lesson is. But like I said, this is gonna be the summary breaking down what it is before I just jump off into it. Um, So validation seeking it starts to happen as a child, right? And if the parent doesn't course correct the child to understand that true um, approval comes from within, and it also comes from above, then you'll never truly understand that, and you'll get caught in the trap of always being a trend chaser, right? That is why people chase trends, because trends are what's hip, right? It's what everyone agrees on or approves of. So, with that being said, that is what sets the tone for most people's belief systems, right? That's how you have a sheep or a herd mentality. Is you have a bunch of people seeking the approval of others. And the reason I say that it sets their tone for life, unless it's consciously changed, is because through this life, you can't go through the motions. Going through the motions or going with the flow is literally letting life happen to you and never consciously or deliberately making the change for yourself. You're always waiting for it to happen versus you making it happen. That's the difference. And then let's get to this last part, and then we're gonna jump off into the deep dive of it. So it says, and if your standard validation seeking system will remain in your subconscious. Oh, let me clean that up a little. So I was saying it'll unless you consciously change it, and if you don't consciously change it, if not, your standard validation seeking system will remain in your subconscious. Most people don't even know what their subconscious mind is. So to briefly touch on that, your subconscious mind is basically what is happening without you thinking about it. For example, breathing, hearing, like you don't have, or feeling, touching, tasting, processing, like say you see a crack in the ground, right? And let's say it's 3 feet, right? Like you have to jump over. Your brain has been in that situation before. Like maybe you were a little kid and it stumped you, right? Like it paused you. Your brain basically store that in your memory bank, so you don't have to think about it later. So whenever you get to that point, you don't have to stop and really think, like, what do I do? I've never experienced this before, right? So your subconscious pretty much saves your brain time with experiences that you've gone through before, and you're not going to be aware of it. You just kind of adapt and move on, right? Depending on how your subconscious is built up and changed consciously, that'll determine your roadmap, or the roadmap for how your brain even operates. Um, so not to get too sidetracked, but I said if your standard, if not, your standard validation seeking system will remain in your subconscious. What I'm saying is the way that you were raised is going to pretty much stay the same unless you deliberately change it, right? Like you do it on purpose. So now it's time for the deep dive into it, man, and as into why most people don't change it, right? So it's a few things we got to understand in this life, man. There are plenty of people um, that the reason they seek the approval of others is because they don't have the courage to be disliked, right? Going against the grain is not a um it's not a normal thing to do. You know what I mean? Even to get into the kingdom of heaven, to live with the Most High Yah in His living word, begotten word Yah Yasha, you have to go against the grain. And it said the road to eternal life is narrow, and few will find it. So even to receive the best gift ever that a human can receive, it's going to be a narrow road, right? You have to have the courage to be disliked. Most people are people pleasers. They have zero spine when it comes to telling people how they truly feel, right? There's an old Japanese saying that we have three masks that we wear, and it's who you are around your peers. So let's say classmates, and coworkers. And then there's a second mask where you're around friends and family, and then the third is when you're absolutely by yourself, and no one's around you, right? That's when integrity truly matters, right? Doing the right thing when no one's looking. And I said that to say this: a lot of people are not their authentic self, and they don't accept their authentic self for who they are, right? That's why they care so much about how others perceive them in this life, which is already subjective because depending on how people grew up, the type of information they indulged in, that's gonna skew their perspective or their bias anyway. So to seek the validations of others is to not love yourself, right? To not understand that you have a uniqueness or um, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. A uniqueness about yourself, right? We're all similar, but we're not the same, right? Um,
That's how, like I was saying earlier, that's how you have people that constantly follow trends, because all they do is seek the approval or validation of others because they don't have enough self care, self love, self esteem, self confidence, self a bunch of stuff to truly value their own opinion and their own thoughts, right? And another reason people don't value their own thoughts is because it's like anything else in this world. If you've never practiced it, you're not going to be good at it, right? If you've never practiced deliberately building up a game plan, following it, and then having some success from it, you're gonna really struggle with trying to run behind yourself, right? That's why most people will never be leaders. They don't trust themselves, and they shouldn't, because they lack the capacity and the aptitude to do what a leader needs to do, and that's self-develop. Most people are actually very comfortable with being mediocre or below average at best. Why? Because it doesn't take any thinking, and it doesn't take any accountability. Most importantly, right? Because most people don't want to accept the fact that that they're not good enough, and they'll have to work on something to be better at said thing. So it's much easier to just go with the flow and not get in anyone's way when it comes to way of thinking, right? Principles. And when it comes down to validation, it truly matters where you get it from, because if you're trying to seek the validation of a wicked man, or a man that is spiritually unclean or spiritually defiled, man, your standard is gonna be set by that of a wicked man, right? You see what I'm saying? And if you dealing with a sucker, with a sucker dude out here, and you a woman, you seeking the validation. Well, that really doesn't happen. But let's just say on the off chance it would, which it doesn't, hypothetical. You know what I'm saying? But let's just say you're seeking to say your friends are in a group, right? You got a bunch of dudes paying broads to do things. But say you trying to seek their approval. Man, you finna be running behind them doing a whole bunch of suck talk. Whole bunch of suck stuff. Don't make no sense. You see what I'm saying? Ain't got no ism in your bones. And you rotten to your core. And all you can do is just run behind them, seeking their laughter, their joy, their nods, their man, that's a good thing you did. Right? So if you're seeking the approval of a adulterer, right? Say an adultery is a man sleeping with another man's wife. If a woman isn't married and she sleeps with a married man, the man committed fornication, right? That's not adultery. Adultery is a married man or a married woman sleeping with another man outside of her husband. If a man sleep with another woman but he's married, that's considered fornication. They are both sins, right? They'll both lead you to that lake. But I had to touch on that real quick. But to get back to what I was saying is, when your validation doesn't come from within, though, what typically tends to happen is you start to be socially driven, and socially driven will always lead you into chaos, because the blind leading the blind, somebody gonna end up in a ditch. You see what I'm saying? And when you don't, uh, and then constantly you're going to be shifting, right? So what I mean by that is you will eventually lose yourself and won't even remember who you are, because you're constantly changing with a never ending cycle of trends, right? That's why trends never end, because they always paying dividends, and them dividends is constant little dopamine hits of approval. And that's what gets people caught up on trends even in the first place. Little likes and comments. That's what keep people caught up in the rat trap, right? But you'll never have long-term gain from it, right? That's why people will follow trends their whole life, lose themselves, and don't even remember who they are. And by the time they're 50, they have a midlife crisis, because you've been running behind trends and validation seeking your whole life, because you hate yourself. Because when you love yourself, you're not constantly running around asking yourself, what do people think of me? And that's not to say that and this is another thing people take out of context. I am not saying that your outer appearance doesn't matter, right? Books have covers for a reason. I ain't never picked up no damn book that talked about spiritual and life guidance that had a cat playing with the ball, jumping through hoops with gasoline draws on, talking about some this is fun as a quotation, like in the little bubble, right? You're gonna look at it and go, huh? Right? Because the picture don't match the words, meaning the actions ain't matching the words, right? So, and like for example, if a man is homeless or he appears to be what we perceive as homeless, everyone has an idea in their own head based on their experiences. But what you don't see a homeless man in is a $30,000 watch. Now, not to say material stuff matter, but what I'm trying to get you to understand is that appearances matter. Even if you just going out the house comfortable, nigga, you can look well put together. You see what I'm saying? You can still have correct posture. See, there are certain things that you can't fake on the exterior, and your posture is one of them. Your enunciation, your tone, you know what I'm saying? The strength in your eye, right? Because everybody don't look people in the eye, and let alone have the eye of the tiger. I ain't, you know what I'm saying? Man, forget that. The eye of the lion in them, right? Those are things that you can't fake. So covers do matter. So I had to touch on that before I go back internal. See, the problem with trying to please man is the bar is constantly moving. There is never a standard that stays the same with man, because good is now becoming evil and evil is now good. So if that can shift and that's major, what do you think about all the minute or minor things? Do you see what I'm saying? So when you constantly running behind man, you're gonna always be chasing uh um something that it's like chasing money. Imagine you keep trying to get more money, talking about generational wealth. Man, you chasing a number that never ends. And on top of that, statistically speaking, they gonna lose all your money by the third generation anyway. And then, people will talk about the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Morgans, the Vanderbilts. They'll talk about all these people. Man, you just named five families, dog. You know what? We'll go. I'll give you 50. Now, what about the other 8 billion families out here? Or I won't even go that high. Let's say 5 billion families out here. Now what? You see what I'm saying? So when you don't seek your validation from the Most High, who has His standard written in your heart and on stone, man, you gonna fall for anything. How can you have a standard set by a wicked man, an unclean man that has a lying tongue and deceit and evilness in his heart? How can you even do such a thing? And if man and if woman came from man, man, why the hell you running after a broad? Now that really don't make no sense. Cause what are you even doing with yourself? You see what I'm saying? So when your validation doesn't come from within, man, you you likely to fall for whatever. And you can't be trusted, especially if you a man, right? And if you a woman running behind anything, that just shows you don't have no male guidance. So whether your father, your brother, your uncle, or who you or some type of male influence, your husband, that really should have been second, really, father, husband. But well, a modern America is on something else, but that's a whole nother video. But what I'm saying is this though: your self approval needs to come within, right? Just like confidence. Confidence can only be built through results. You cannot call yourself confident if you've never that's like saying you confident in your stamina, but you ain't never ran, swimmed, did stairs, ran hills. You ain't did nothing to improve your car. Man, you not finna be confident in your cardio. From what? You ain't put the work in and receive a result that gives you certainty that you can do such a thing. That's like me taking you in the ocean and say, "All right, man, we need you to do underwater welding." Man, you finna be like, "I don't know how to do this." Of course you don't. Why would you have confidence? You ain't put in the work. So it's like that with anything: confidence, self-esteem, discipline. Like it's everything. So if you've never learned to love the small things about yourself, how would you love the big things, the major insecurities? You can't. And another thing is people are constantly trying to alter themselves. Man, you got dudes out here having leg surgery about their height, man. Like genetics forgot you were short. Like your kids ain't finna. Man, the only way for you to course correct that is for you to go get with a tall woman. And even then, your kids are gonna be your kids should still be taller than what they are. They can be like, hold on, why am I just 2 inches shorter than my dad, but both of y'all 6'3"?
Well, technically, I'm really 5'5" with a 5'5" wingspan, but I'm 6'3" now with a 5'5" wingspan. It's like, come on, dog, nigga, do you hate yourself that much? You see what I'm saying? So when it comes down to seeking validation, it truly does matter where you get it from. Because if you truly care about yourself, love yourself, and your mind is fixated on self development and growth, man, you ain't finna mislead yourself. Espe- Especially if you following the Most High, you for sure ain't going the wrong way. So with that being said, man, validation seeking stems from a long, long line of uh, approval seeking, pretty much. So if you don't take nothing away from this video, other if you don't take one thing away from this video, take this: learn to love yourself, learn to accept yourself despite it all. But that doesn't mean don't improve yourself naturally, organically, and efficiently and effectively. I'm not telling you to go out here and modifying yourself. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is self improve yourself. Like, well, when I say modify, I mean organically modify. Like, modify yourself organically, meaning get in the gym, fast, do all these different things. Do not go out here getting lipo and then you die on the table and you got your family mourning, crying, all because you don't love yourself. You see what I'm saying? So when it come down to it, man, that's all you got to do in this world is learn to love yourself. And it's easy said. It's harder slightly to be done depending on how far you are in this process. But with that being said, man, consciously decide to change the way you view yourself and the way you perceive everything around you, and that'll start to really shift your mindset towards validation seeking. And quite frankly, some quick tips is, man, get off the internet and stop talking to everybody. Because most people, when you start to quickly understand, most people are a bunch of sheep. And they now, and I'm not talking about the sheep goat from the Bible. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying when I say sheep, I mean they are quite literally blindly following, because sheep are only going to be led to the kingdom if they're following the Hamashiach, the Messiah, the righteous shepherd, right? If you are running behind some type of false preacher or false pastor, you are a sheep being led astray. You're going to end up with the goats. Just to touch on that briefly. So what I'm saying is, at some point, man, you finna have to start thinking with your head. But with that being said, man, this boy D got sense, and uh, shout out everybody that has inspired me over the years, whether they hear it or not. Some have died 100 years ago from these books. Some are still living because they posted it 7 years ago. And with that being said, use your head, don't lose your head. It's D got sense, and I'm out.